Thomas Caldwell stood frozen on his porch at dawn, coffee cup halfway to his lips, staring at something no rancher ever wants to see. Wolves. Hundreds of them. They formed a silent circle around his property, sitting perfectly still in the morning mist, golden eyes fixed on his house, not growling, not pacing, just waiting. His hand trembled, hot coffee spilling over his knuckles, but he couldn't move. In 43 years of ranching, he'd shot wolves, trapped wolves, chased them off with fire and buckshot, but he'd never seen them like this. They sat like soldiers awaiting orders, breath rising in small clouds, frost clinging to their gray fur. And then he saw her, his daughter Emma, barefoot in her nightgown, standing in the middle of the yard, between him and the wolves. She raised one small hand, palm out, fingers spread wide. The wolves didn't move. Neither did Thomas. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought it might crack, because he suddenly understood. This wasn't an attack. This was an answer. What I'm about to tell you today will change how you see loyalty forever. But first, tell me, where are you listening from? I love knowing which corner of the country you're tuning in from. Drop it in the comments below. 6 months earlier, Thomas Caldwell had been a different man. He sat tall in his saddle, surveying 2,000 acres of prime Montana rangeland, cattle scattered across the valley like brown stones in a river. His wife Martha had been gone 3 years, and he'd poured every waking hour into the ranch. The cattle were fat, the fences were strong, but his 12-year-old daughter Emma moved through the house like a ghost he'd forgotten to notice. She set his plate on the table each night without a word, ate in silence, and disappeared to her room before he finished his coffee. Thomas told himself this was normal. Girls her age got quiet. They got moody. He remembered his own sister going through something similar back in Texas 30 years ago. Besides, he had a ranch to run. 300 head of cattle didn't feed themselves. The north pasture fence needed mending before winter. The water pump by the creek was making a grinding sound that meant trouble. A man couldn't spend all day worrying about a child's feelings when there was real work to be done. But Martha's sister, Aunt Caroline, saw things differently. She rode out from town one Sunday in September, her wagon rattling up the dirt road, dust rising behind her wheels. Thomas watched her approach from the barn, jaw tightening. Caroline had opinions about everything, and she wasn't shy about sharing them. She climbed down from the wagon, skirts swishing, and marched straight toward him without so much as a hello. Her face was set hard, like stone that had been left in winter frost. "When's the last time you spoke to that girl?" Caroline said, not asked. She planted herself in front of him, hands on her hips. Thomas wiped his hands on his pants, buying time. "I spoke to her this morning. Told her to gather the eggs." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "I mean spoke to her, Thomas, not at her. When's the last time you asked her how she's doing? When's the last time you sat with her?" He felt heat rising up his neck. "I provide for her. She's got a roof, food, everything she needs. Everything except a father," Caroline said, voice sharp as a knife blade. The words hung in the air between them. Thomas felt something twist in his chest, but he pushed it down. "I'm doing the best I can, Caroline. This ranch doesn't run itself. If I don't work, we don't eat." Caroline shook her head slowly. "That girl needs more than food, Thomas. She needs you to see her. She's drowning, and you're too busy counting cattle to notice." That night, Thomas lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling beams. Caroline's words echoed in his head, mixing with the sound of wind against the shutters. He tried to remember the last real conversation he'd had with Emma. Not instructions about chores, not comments about the weather. A real conversation. He couldn't. The realization settled over him like cold water. He pushed it away and focused on tomorrow's work. The south pasture needed riding. 2 calves were showing signs of sickness. The next morning, Emma was already in the kitchen when Thomas came downstairs. She stood at the stove, scrambling eggs in the iron skillet, her long brown hair tied back with a piece of twine. She didn't turn when he entered. Thomas poured himself coffee and sat at the table, watching her small back, the way her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to make herself smaller. "Emma," he said. She stiffened but didn't turn. "Yes, sir." The sir made his stomach clench. "How are you?" he asked. It came out awkward, formal. Emma finally turned, spatula in hand, and looked at him with eyes so much like Martha's it hurt. "I'm fine," she said. No emotion, no connection, just words to fill space. She turned back to the eggs. Thomas opened his mouth to say more, but nothing came. What did you say to a child who'd become a stranger? He sipped his coffee instead and told himself he'd try again tomorrow. But tomorrow came and went, and the words never got easier. October arrived with the first hard frost. Thomas lost 2 calves to wolves in the high pasture. He found them at dawn, throats torn, blood black on the frozen grass. Rage filled him, hot and familiar. He rode back to the ranch, grabbed his rifle, and spent 3 days tracking the pack. He shot 1 wolf, a gray female, and wounded another. It felt good, felt right. Wolves were killers. They took what wasn't theirs. They had to be stopped. When he rode home, Emma was sitting on the porch steps waiting. "Did you kill them?" she asked. Her voice was flat, but her hands were balled into fists in her lap. Thomas dismounted, rifle slung over his shoulder. "Got one. The pack will move on now." Emma stood up slowly. "They were just hungry," she said. Thomas felt irritation flash through him. "They killed our calves, Emma. That's money. That's our livelihood." She looked at him with those dark eyes, and something in her expression made him uncomfortable. "They have babies too," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked into the house. That night, Emma's door stayed closed. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, drinking whiskey he'd been saving for Christmas. Caroline's words came back again. "She's drowning and you're too busy to notice." He pushed the glass away and went to Emma's door. He raised his hand to knock, then heard something that made him freeze. Crying. Soft, muffled, like she was pressing her face into her pillow so he wouldn't hear. Thomas stood there, hands still raised, and felt something crack inside his chest. But he didn't knock. He lowered his hand and walked away. He told himself she needed space. He told himself she'd be fine in the morning. November brought snow, early and heavy. The ranch work became harder, colder. Thomas spent long days breaking ice on water troughs, hauling feed through drifts that reached his knees. Emma did her chores without being asked. She gathered eggs, fed the chickens, swept the porch, but she moved through it all like someone sleepwalking. She was there, but not there, present, but absent. And Thomas was too tired, too cold, too focused on keeping the ranch running to figure out what to do about it. One afternoon, Thomas rode out to check the fence line near the woods. The snow was deep, his horse's breath coming in white clouds. That's when he saw her, Emma, standing at the edge of the tree line, perfectly still. She wasn't wearing a coat, just her dress and a thin shawl. Thomas's heart jumped. "Emma!" he shouted. She didn't move. He urged his horse forward, breaking through the drifts. When he got close, he saw what she was looking at. Wolves, 4 of them, maybe 30 yards into the woods, watching. "Get back to the house," Thomas said, reaching for his rifle. Emma turned to look at him, and her expression stopped him cold. There was no fear in her eyes, no panic, just a strange, distant calm. "They're not going to hurt me," she said. Thomas felt ice run down his spine. "Emma, get on the horse. Now." She looked back at the wolves one more time, then walked to him slowly, like she was leaving a church service. Not a predator sighting. He pulled her up behind him, feeling how thin she'd gotten, how small. They rode back in silence. When they reached the barn, Emma slid off the horse without a word and walked toward the house. Thomas watched her go, then turned to look back at the woods. The wolves were still there, gray shapes among the trees, watching. That night, he checked Emma's room after she'd gone to bed. She was asleep or pretending to be. On her bedside table was a small pile of objects: feathers, smooth stones, a piece of deer antler, and something that made Thomas's blood run cold: wolf fur, a small tuft of gray fur tied with string. The next morning, Thomas confronted her at breakfast. "Where did you get that fur?" Emma looked up from her oatmeal, face blank. "I found it." His hands tightened on his coffee cup. "Found it where?" She shrugged. "In the woods. I go walking sometimes." Thomas felt his voice rising. "You're going into the woods? Alone?" "There are wolves out there, Emma. They're dangerous." She met his eyes then, and something flickered in her expression. "So are people," she said quietly. "But we're still here." Thomas didn't know what to say to that. He stood up, chair scraping against the floor. Stay out of the woods. That's an order. Emma went back to her oatmeal, and Thomas rode out to the range, anger and confusion churning in his gut. But Emma didn't stay out of the woods. He knew it because he'd see her tracks in the snow, small boot prints leading into the trees. He'd see her come back at dusk, cheeks flushed from cold, something peaceful in her expression that vanished the moment she saw him. December came, and with it, harder times. Thomas lost another calf, then 2 more. The wolves were getting bolder. He saw their tracks everywhere, circling the ranch like they were planning something. He set traps and checked them daily. One morning he found a trap sprung but empty, the bait gone. The next day, another trap. Same thing. It didn't make sense. Wolves weren't that smart, weren't that careful. He started to wonder if someone was interfering with his traps. But who would do that? The nearest neighbor was 10 miles away. Then he found the answer. He came back early from checking the north pasture, riding through the woods on a shortcut. That's when he saw Emma. She was kneeling in the snow, working at something with her hands. Thomas dismounted quietly and moved closer, staying behind trees. Emma was at one of his traps. She was carefully springing it, taking the bait, covering the trap with snow and branches. Thomas felt rage bloom in his chest, hot and blinding. He stepped out from behind the tree. "What the hell are you doing?" Emma jumped, spinning around. The bait fell from her hands. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Emma's face did something Thomas had never seen before. It hardened. "I'm saving them," she said. Her voice was steady, no apology in it. Thomas walked toward her. "You're sabotaging my traps. Those wolves are killing our cattle. They're costing us money we don't have." Emma stood up, small but not backing down. "They're starving because you killed their mother." The words hit Thomas like a fist. "What?" Emma's eyes were bright, whether from cold or tears he couldn't tell. "The wolf you shot, the gray one. She was feeding 4 pups. I found them. They were crying for her." Thomas felt the ground shift under him. "You've been feeding wolves?" His voice came out strangled. Emma lifted her chin. "They were babies. They would have died." Thomas grabbed her arm, not hard, but firmly. "We're going home. Now." They rode back in silence, Emma sitting rigid behind him. When they reached the house, Thomas tied his horse and followed Emma inside. She went straight to her room, but he caught the door before she could close it. "Emma, we need to talk." She sat on her bed, hands folded in her lap, face closed off again. Thomas struggled to find words. "What you're doing is dangerous, and it's wrong. Those wolves are predators. They kill to survive. That's their nature. Like you," Emma said quietly. The words stopped Thomas cold. "What's that supposed to mean?" Emma looked at him with eyes too old for her face. "You kill things too. You killed their mother. She was just trying to feed her babies, same as you, same as anyone." Thomas felt something breaking inside him, but he didn't know how to stop it. "It's not the same, Emma. This is our livelihood. This is survival." Emma shook her head slowly. "No, it's revenge. You were angry, so you killed her, and now her babies are dying." Thomas stood there, the truth of her words cutting into him like cold wind. He tried to speak, but his throat was tight. Finally, he managed. "You can't save wild animals, Emma. That's not how it works. They're not meant to be pets or friends. They're meant to stay wild." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not trying to make them pets. I'm just trying to keep them alive. Someone has to." The way she said someone made Thomas's chest ache, like she was talking about more than wolves. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Emma's face, the way she'd looked at him, like he was a stranger, like he was the dangerous one. He thought about Martha, how she would have handled this. Martha would have known what to say. Martha would have seen what Emma needed before it got this far. But Martha was gone, and Thomas had spent 3 years pretending that work could fill the hole she'd left. He got up, poured himself water, and stood at the window. Snow was falling, soft and silent. Somewhere out there, wolves were circling, and his daughter was choosing them over him. The next morning, Emma's door was already open when Thomas woke. He found her in the kitchen, making breakfast as always. They ate in silence. Thomas wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. After breakfast, Emma put on her coat. "I'm going to gather eggs," she said. Thomas nodded. "Don't go in the woods." Emma didn't answer. She just walked out. Thomas watched her go, a small figure moving through the snow toward the chicken coop, and he realized with sudden, crushing clarity that he was losing her, had maybe already lost her. The days that followed were strange. Emma did her chores. Thomas did his work. They circled each other like cautious animals. But something had shifted. Thomas found himself watching her more, noticing small things. The way she saved scraps from dinner in a cloth. The way she'd stand at the window looking toward the woods. The way her face had become a mask, hiding whatever she really felt. And he understood finally what Caroline had meant. His daughter was drowning, and he'd been too angry, too stubborn, too buried in his own grief to see it. Christmas came and went, barely acknowledged. Thomas carved a small wooden horse for Emma, left it on the kitchen table. She thanked him politely, like he was a distant uncle, and put it on her shelf. It sat there, never touched, never played with. The distance between them grew wider. Thomas tried to bridge it with small gestures. He asked about her day. He complimented her cooking, but every attempt felt hollow. Too little, too late. Emma responded with one-word answers and empty smiles, and the wolves kept circling, closer every day. Then, one January morning, Thomas woke to find Emma's bed empty. The house was still dark, dawn not yet breaking. Panic seized him. He threw on his clothes, grabbed his rifle, and ran outside. Her tracks in the snow led straight to the woods. Thomas followed them, heart pounding. The tracks went deep into the trees, winding through the pines. And then he heard it, singing. Emma's voice, high and clear, singing something he didn't recognize. A melody with no words. He pushed through the branches and stopped dead. Emma sat in a clearing, surrounded by wolves. Not 4, not 5, dozens. They formed a circle around her, sitting quietly, ears pricked forward. Emma sat in the center, still singing. Her hands were spread on her knees, palms up. The wolves watched her like she was something sacred. Thomas felt his breath catch, his finger on the rifle trigger. One move, one shot, and this could all end. But he couldn't pull the trigger, because he saw something in Emma's face he hadn't seen in 3 years. Peace, joy, connection. She was alive there, truly alive, in a way she'd never been in his house. Emma's song faded. She lowered her hands. The wolves didn't move. And then, slowly, Emma turned and looked directly at Thomas. She'd known he was there all along. Their eyes met across the clearing. Thomas saw no fear in her face, no apology, just a quiet question. He looked at the wolves, then back at his daughter, and he finally understood. She wasn't choosing wolves over him. She was choosing life over loneliness. She was choosing connection over isolation. She'd found something in these woods that she couldn't find in his house. A family that saw her, that accepted her, that needed her. Thomas lowered his rifle. Emma stood up slowly. The wolves stood with her, moving in perfect synchronization. For a moment, man, girl, and wolves formed a strange triangle in the winter woods. Then Emma raised one hand, palm out, fingers spread. The wolves turned as one and melted into the trees, silent as smoke. Emma walked toward her father. When she reached him, she stopped. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Thomas shook his head. "No, I'm sorry." His voice broke on the words. "I haven't been seeing you, Emma. I've been so busy surviving. I forgot we're supposed to be living." Emma's face crumpled. Thomas dropped the rifle and pulled her into his arms. She felt small, fragile, like a bird with hollow bones. But when she wrapped her arms around him and sobbed into his coat, he felt something shift. Something breaking and rebuilding at the same time. They stood there in the snow, father and daughter, while the wolves watched from the shadows. Thomas didn't know how to fix what he'd broken, didn't know how to bridge 3 years of distance in one moment. But he held his daughter tight and whispered, "I see you now, I see you." And it was a start. The walk back to the ranch was slow. Thomas kept his hand on Emma's shoulder, afraid that if he let go, she might disappear like morning fog. Neither of them spoke, but the silence felt different now, less empty, more full of things that needed saying but couldn't be rushed. When they reached the house, Thomas made hot coffee and cocoa, and they sat at the kitchen table. Emma wrapped her hands around the warm cup, steam rising between them. Thomas cleared his throat. "Tell me about them. The wolves." Emma looked up, surprised. For a moment, she seemed to weigh whether this was a trick, whether he was testing her. Then something softened in her face. There were 4 pups. When I found them, they were so small. They were crying for their mother, and they didn't understand why she wasn't coming back. Her voice caught. I couldn't just leave them there to die. Thomas felt guilt twist in his stomach. I didn't know, he said quietly. Emma nodded. I know. But not knowing doesn't change what happened. The words stung because they were true. Thomas stared into his coffee, seeing his reflection dark and distorted. Your mother would have known what to do. She always knew. Emma's hand stopped moving on her cup. Mama would have saved them too, she said. She saved that hawk once, remember? The one with the broken wing. She kept it in the barn for 2 months. Thomas did remember. Martha had nursed that bird back to health, ignored his complaints about wasted time and effort. When it finally flew away, she'd cried with joy. You're like her, Thomas said. More than I realized. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I try to be, but it's hard when no one's watching. The words hit Thomas like a hammer. He reached across the table and took her hand. I'm watching now, Emma, I promise. She squeezed his hand back, and Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Small and fragile, but real. They finished their drinks in silence, but this time it was comfortable, healing. Over the next days, things began to change. Thomas started asking Emma real questions. What did she like to read? What did she dream about? Emma answered cautiously at first, testing whether this new version of her father would last. But Thomas kept showing up. He sat with her at meals. He listened when she talked about the wolves. He stopped working from dawn to dusk and started coming home before dark. The ranch work didn't disappear, but it stopped consuming everything. Emma started showing him her world. She took him to where she'd hidden food for the wolves, a hollow tree a quarter mile into the woods. Inside were wrapped bundles of jerky, dried meat, even some of her own dinner portions she'd saved. Thomas saw how thin she'd gotten and felt sick. You've been giving them your food? Emma shrugged. They needed it more than me. Thomas made a decision then. From now on, if you're going to feed them, we do it right. We'll set aside scraps from butchering, extra meat. You don't starve yourself for anything. But not everyone was happy about the changes. Aunt Caroline rode out again in February, and this time she brought news from town. People are talking, Thomas. They're saying your girl is touched in the head, running with wolves like some kind of wild thing. She sat in the parlor, back rigid, disapproval in every line of her face. Mrs. Henderson saw her in the woods last week, singing to them. People think it's unnatural. Thomas felt his jaw tighten. What Emma does isn't anyone's business but ours. Caroline's eyes narrowed. It becomes their business when those wolves start killing their livestock too. You think you're the only rancher losing cattle? Thomas hadn't thought about that. Who else? Caroline counted on her fingers. The Johnsons lost 3 calves last week. The Mitchells lost 2. Even old Samuel down by the river lost a sheep. She leaned forward. And every one of them knows your daughter has been feeding those beasts. They're not going to stand for it much longer. After Caroline left, Thomas found Emma in the barn, brushing down the horses. Did you hear? He asked. She nodded without turning. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Thomas walked closer. Are the wolves taking other people's cattle? Emma's hand stilled on the brush. I don't know, maybe. She turned to face him. But if they are, it's because there's no other food. The deer are scarce this winter. The rabbits are hibernating. They're starving, Papa. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. Emma, I understand that, but other people won't. They see wolves as killers, plain and simple. Emma's voice rose. But they're not. They're just trying to survive, same as us. Thomas held up his hands. I know. I believe you. But we have to think about this practically. If the wolves keep taking livestock, the ranchers are going to organize a hunt, a big one. They'll wipe out the whole pack. The color drained from Emma's face. No, they can't. Thomas felt torn between his daughter's pain and the reality of the situation. They can, and they will, unless we find another solution. Emma grabbed his arm. What solution? What can we do? Thomas thought hard. I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out together. Emma searched his face, then nodded slowly. Together, she repeated. It sounded like a prayer. That night, Thomas lay awake making plans. The wolves needed food, but they couldn't keep stealing cattle. What if there was a way to provide for them without taking from the ranchers? What if they could hunt deer, bring down enough meat to keep the wolves fed through the winter? It wasn't perfect, but it might work. In the morning, he shared the idea with Emma. Her face lit up in a way he hadn't seen in years. "You'd do that? You'd help feed them?" "I'd do it for you," Thomas said simply. And he meant it. Over the next weeks, Thomas and Emma hunted together. They tracked deer through the woods, brought down bucks and does, and left the meat in designated spots for the wolves. It was hard work, exhausting work, but Emma glowed with purpose. She talked more, smiled more, came alive in ways Thomas had forgotten were possible. And slowly, the wolf attacks on livestock decreased. The Johnsons reported no losses. The Mitchells' cattle stayed safe, but the peace didn't last. In early March, Samuel's son rode up to the ranch, face red with fury. "Your daughter," he spat, pointing at Emma, who stood on the porch. "She's protecting those devils. My father saw her leading wolves away from his land, directing them like dogs." Thomas stepped between them. "My daughter isn't directing anything." Samuel's son leaned forward in his saddle. "She's been seen talking to them, singing to them. People in town say she's made a pact with something unholy." Emma's voice rang out clear. "I haven't made a pact with anything. I'm just helping them survive." Samuel's son laughed, harsh and mean. "Helping wolves, while Christians lose their livelihoods. Your daughter's sick in the head, Caldwell. Everyone knows it." Thomas felt rage bloom hot in his chest. "Get off my property. Now." The young man smirked. "My father's organizing a hunting party. Next week, we're going to kill every wolf in these woods, and there's nothing you can do to stop us." After he rode away, Emma turned to Thomas, eyes wide with panic. "We have to warn them. We have to get them to leave." Thomas grabbed her shoulders gently. "Emma, they can't leave. This is their territory. Where would they go?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Then what do we do? I can't let them die, Papa. I can't." Thomas pulled her close, mind racing. There had to be a way. There had to be something they could do. That evening, Thomas rode into town. He went to the general store, the saloon, knocking on doors, talking to ranchers. He explained about the hunting, how Emma had helped divert the wolves to deer instead of cattle. Some men listened. Most didn't. "Those are still killers, Thomas," old Mr. Henderson said, shaking his head. "One bad winter and they'll go right back to our stock. Better to eliminate them now." Thomas tried to argue, but he could see it in their eyes. Fear, anger, determination. When Thomas got home, he found Emma at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. She'd drawn maps of the woods, marked the wolves' territories, their dens, their hunting grounds. "I'm trying to figure out where they'd be safest," she said, not looking up. "Maybe deeper in the mountains? Maybe across the river where nobody goes." Thomas sat down across from her. "Emma, even if we could move them, they'd come back. This is their home." She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Then I'll stay with them. I'll warn them when the hunters come." "Absolutely not," Thomas said firmly. "You're not putting yourself in danger." Emma stood up, knocking her chair back. "They're in danger because of me, because I couldn't save their mother, because I've been feeding them, making them trust people. If they die, it's my fault." Her voice broke on the last word. Thomas stood too, walking around the table to her. "Nothing that happens is your fault. You were trying to do something good, something kind. But kindness isn't enough," Emma whispered. "Is it? Sometimes you can love something with your whole heart, and it still isn't enough to save it." Thomas felt the words cut deep because they weren't just about wolves. They were about loss, about Martha, about all the things they couldn't control or fix. He pulled Emma into his arms. "We're not giving up yet. There's still a week. We'll think of something." Emma clung to him. "Promise?" He kissed the top of her head. "Promise." The next days passed in a blur. Thomas tried everything. He offered to compensate ranchers for their losses. He suggested posting guards instead of killing. He even went to the sheriff asking him to intervene. Nothing worked. The hunting party was set for Saturday. 40 men with rifles and dogs. They planned to sweep the woods systematically, leaving no wolf alive. Emma spent her time in the forest, with the pack. Thomas watched her go each morning with a heavy heart, knowing she was saying goodbye. On Friday night, Emma came home late. Thomas was waiting on the porch, lantern in hand. She climbed the steps slowly, and he saw something in her face that made his blood run cold. "Emma, what did you do?" She met his eyes steadily. "I asked them to help." Thomas's stomach dropped. "Asked who?" Emma took a deep breath. "The wolves. I asked them to help save themselves." Thomas felt ice spread through his veins. "What does that mean?" Emma sat down on the porch steps, and he sat beside her. "I told them about the hunt. I don't know if they understand words, but they understand tone. They understand danger. And I showed them something." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. On it was a simple drawing. A hand raised, palm out, fingers spread. "This signal. I've been using it since the beginning. When I hold my hand like this, they know to stop, to wait, to trust me." Thomas stared at the drawing. "Emma, they're animals. They can't understand battle plans or strategies." Emma's voice was quiet but certain. "No, but they understand family. They understand protection. And they've learned to trust me, Papa. Tomorrow morning before the hunt, I'm going to the woods. I'm going to give the signal. And I'm going to ask them to show those men something." "Show them what?" Thomas asked, though part of him already knew. Emma looked at him with eyes that seemed too old for her face. "That they're not mindless killers. That they're a family, just like us. That they deserve to live." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "Emma, this is dangerous. These men are scared and angry. If something goes wrong..." Emma cut him off. "Something's already wrong, Papa. The world where people only see wolves as monsters, where fear wins over understanding. That's what's wrong." Thomas knew he should forbid it, should lock Emma in her room and keep her safe. But when he looked at his daughter, he saw someone he barely recognized. She'd grown up in the months he hadn't been watching, become someone strong and certain and brave, someone who loved fiercely, who fought for what she believed in, someone like Martha. "I'm coming with you," he said finally. Emma's eyes widened. "What?" Thomas stood up, offering his hand. "Tomorrow. I'm coming with you to the woods. Whatever happens, we face it together." Emma took his hand and he pulled her to her feet. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Together," she whispered. They stood there on the porch as night deepened around them. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, then another, then a chorus, rising and falling like a sad song. Emma tilted her head, listening. "They're scared," she said softly. "They know something's coming." Thomas squeezed her hand. "So do we." That night, neither of them slept much. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, cleaning his rifle not to hunt, but to protect if needed. Emma was in her room, and he could hear her moving around, preparing. At dawn, they met in the kitchen. Emma wore her warmest coat and boots. Her hair was braided tight. She looked like a soldier preparing for battle. Thomas made them both coffee, and they drank it in silence, watching the sun rise through the window. "It's time," Emma said finally. Thomas nodded and stood. They walked out together across the snow-covered yard toward the woods. The air was cold and still, their breath coming in white clouds. Behind them, the ranch sat quiet. Ahead, the trees waited, dark and deep. Thomas could hear his heart beating in his ears. Emma's hand found his, and he gripped it tight. Whatever happened next would change everything. He could feel it in his bones. They reached the tree line and paused. Emma closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then cupped her hands around her mouth. She made a sound Thomas had heard before but never really listened to. It was the sound she'd been making in the clearing. Not quite a howl, not quite a song. Something in between. They waited. The woods were silent. Then, slowly, shapes began to emerge from the shadows. Wolves. Dozens of them. They came from all directions, moving through the trees like gray ghosts. Emma raised her hand, palm out, fingers spread, and every single wolf sat down. Thomas felt his breath catch. The wolves watched Emma with intelligent eyes, ears pricked forward, waiting. "Now what?" he whispered. Emma didn't lower her hand. "Now we go to the ranch, and we show them that love is stronger than fear." She started walking backward, hand still raised, and the wolves stood. They followed her, slowly, carefully. A living river of gray and silver. Thomas walked beside his daughter, heart pounding. They were leading a wolf pack to the ranch, to the men who wanted them dead. It was the craziest, bravest thing he'd ever seen, and he didn't try to stop it. What would you have done in his place? A father watching his daughter risk everything for what she believed in. Think about it as we continue, because what happened next, nobody could have predicted. They emerged from the woods just as the sun broke over the horizon. Emma walked ahead, hand still raised, palm out. Behind her, 200 wolves moved in perfect silence. Thomas walked beside her, rifle slung over his shoulder, every muscle tight with tension. His heart hammered so hard he could hear it in his ears. The ranch came into view and he saw them. 40 men on horseback gathered in his yard, dogs on chains, rifles gleaming. They'd come early, ready to start the hunt. Samuel stood at the front, gray beard bristling. He was the first to see them. His face went white as snow. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. The other men turned, and Thomas heard gasps, curses, the sound of rifles being cocked. The dogs went crazy, barking and lunging against their chains. But Emma didn't stop walking. She moved toward the men with steady steps, wolves flowing behind her like water. Thomas wanted to grab her, pull her back, but he knew she wouldn't stop. This was her moment, her choice. "Don't shoot," Thomas called out, his voice cracking. Nobody shoot, but he saw fingers on triggers, saw fear in the men's eyes. These weren't soldiers. They were ranchers, farmers, ordinary men facing something that looked like a nightmare. Samuel's son raised his rifle. "They're going to attack. Get ready." Emma stopped 20 yards from the men. She lowered her hand slowly, and every wolf behind her sat. The sudden silence was deafening. Even the dogs stopped barking, confused by what they were seeing. Emma's voice rang out clear and strong. "These wolves aren't here to hurt you." Samuel found his voice. "Girl, get away from those beasts. They'll tear you apart." Emma shook her head. "They won't. They've never hurt me. Not once in all these months." She gestured to the wolves behind her. "They're a family. Mothers, fathers, pups, they're just trying to survive, same as you." A younger rancher, Johnson's son, spat on the ground. "They killed our cattle. Cost us money we can't afford." "Because they were starving," Emma said, and Thomas heard the tremor in her voice now. "Because I made a mistake. I saved 4 wolf pups after my father killed their mother. I fed them, raised them, taught them to trust people. And then winter came, and there wasn't enough food. They took your cattle because I taught them that humans provide." The words hung in the cold air. Thomas saw confusion on the men's faces. Samuel lowered his rifle slightly. "You're saying this is your fault?" Emma's voice broke. "Yes, it's my fault. I was trying to save them, but I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about your families, your livelihoods." Tears streamed down her face. "But killing them won't fix anything. It'll just create more orphans, more hunger, more death." She raised her hand again, and Thomas watched something extraordinary happen. The wolves stood as one and moved forward, parting around Emma. They formed a semicircle between the girl and the men. Not aggressive, not threatening, just there, protecting her the way she'd protected them. Samuel's rifle wavered. "What kind of witchcraft is this?" Emma wiped her tears with her sleeve. "It's not witchcraft, it's trust. They've learned that when I make this signal, they're safe. They've learned that I won't let anyone hurt them." She took a deep breath. "And I'm asking you, all of you, to see them the way I do. Not as monsters. As living things that deserve a chance." Thomas stepped forward then, standing beside his daughter. "She's right. These past weeks we've been hunting deer, feeding the wolves. Your cattle have been safe." Johnson pushed forward on his horse. "For how long? What happens next winter, or the winter after that?" Thomas met his eyes. "We keep hunting. We keep providing. Emma and I will make sure they have enough food that they don't need your livestock." Samuel shook his head slowly. "One man and a girl can't feed 200 wolves." Thomas felt Emma's hand slip into his. "Then we find another way. But we don't solve this with bullets. We solve it with understanding." The men shifted uncertain. Some lowered their rifles. Others kept them raised. Thomas could see the struggle on their faces, fear warring with something else. Doubt, maybe, or curiosity. Then old Henderson spoke up from the back. "I saw my grandson playing with a stray dog last week. That dog had been wild, stealing chickens. But the boy fed it, talked to it, now it sleeps on his porch." He looked at Emma. "Maybe wolves aren't so different." Samuel's son exploded. "You're all mad. These are killers. Predators." He raised his rifle, aiming at the largest wolf. a gray male sitting closest to Emma. Time seemed to slow. Thomas saw the finger tightening on the trigger. He saw Emma's eyes go wide. And then something happened that would haunt Thomas for the rest of his life. Emma threw herself sideways, directly into the line of fire. "No!" Thomas lunged for her. The rifle cracked. Emma cried out. The world exploded into chaos. The wolves surged forward, not attacking but surrounding Emma's fallen body. Thomas crashed through them, shoving wolves aside, not caring if they bit him. He found Emma on the ground, clutching her arm. Blood seeped between her fingers, staining the snow crimson. "Emma!" His hand shook as he pulled her sleeve back. The bullet had grazed her upper arm, cutting a deep furrow but missing bone. Relief and rage battled in Thomas's chest. He whipped around to face the men. "You shot my daughter!" His voice was raw, primal. Samuel's son sat frozen on his horse, rifle still smoking. His face had gone gray. I didn't mean..." She jumped. Samuel grabbed his son's rifle away. "You fool! What have you done?" The wolves were agitated now, circling, growling low in their throats. But they didn't attack. They stayed close to Emma, forming a protective wall. Thomas tore his bandana off and wrapped it around Emma's arm. "You're okay. You're going to be okay." Emma looked up at him, face pale but eyes fierce. "I had to, Papa. I couldn't let them kill him." She was looking at the gray wolf, the one who'd been in the rifle's sights. The wolf stood beside her now, its massive head level with hers. It pressed its nose to her cheek, a gesture so tender it made Thomas's throat close. Emma reached up with her good hand and touched the wolf's face. "I couldn't let them kill any of them." She turned to the men. "Do you see now? Do you see what they are?" Henderson climbed down from his horse slowly. He walked forward, past the line of wolves, until he stood over Emma and Thomas. "I see a girl willing to die for what she believes in." He looked at the wolves, really looked at them. "I see creatures that could have torn us apart but chose not to." He turned to Samuel. "Maybe we've been wrong. Maybe there's another way." Samuel's face was a mask of conflict. "My son could have killed her. My son..." His voice broke. Samuel's son slid off his horse, legs barely holding him. He walked forward on shaking legs until he stood in front of Emma. "I'm sorry. God forgive me. I'm so sorry." Tears streamed down his young face. "I didn't see you. I just saw the wolf and I..." He couldn't finish. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "I know. That's the problem. You only saw a wolf. You didn't see a living thing with a family, with feelings." She struggled to sit up, Thomas supporting her. "But you see it now, don't you?" The young man nodded, unable to speak. Other men were dismounting now, moving closer. They formed a circle around Emma, Thomas, and the wolves. The dogs had gone silent. Even the horses had calmed. Johnson spoke, his voice thick. "What you did just now, jumping in front of that bullet, that took more courage than anything I've ever seen." He looked at the wolves. "And these creatures staying calm when they could have attacked. That tells me something." He met Thomas's eyes. "Maybe there is another way." Samuel cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I lost my wife 5 years ago. Consumption. I wasn't there when she died because I was out hunting wolves. Thought if I could control the land, control the predators, I could control everything else." He looked at Emma. "But you can't control life. You can only choose how you respond to it." He took off his hat. "I vote we call off the hunt. Anyone disagree?" Silence. Then, one by one, the men lowered their rifles. Thomas felt something break open in his chest. Relief, gratitude, hope, all flooding through him at once. He helped Emma to her feet, keeping his arm around her. She swayed slightly, dizzy from blood loss and shock. The gray wolf pressed against her legs, supporting her from the other side. Thomas looked at the animal, really looked at it. Intelligence shone in those amber eyes. Loyalty. Love. Emma had seen it all along. She'd seen what everyone else had missed. Henderson spoke up. "So what happens now? We just let them roam free?" Thomas found his voice. "Emma and I will keep hunting, keep them fed. But we could use help. If each ranch contributed even scraps from butchering, it would ease the burden. We work together to keep both wolves and cattle safe." Samuel nodded slowly. "My son here owes Emma his apology in more than words. He can help you hunt." The young man looked up, hope dawning on his face. "I would. I'd be honored to. Other men stepped forward. I can spare some meat from my smokehouse. I'll help hunt on Saturdays. My boys can help check on the pack, make sure they're not getting too close to cattle. Emma looked around at all of them, tears streaming freely now. Thank you. Thank you all. Her voice was barely a whisper. Thomas tightened his arm around her. We should get that wound cleaned and bandaged. Samuel gestured to his horse. Take mine. Get her to the house, quick. Thomas lifted Emma onto the horse and climbed up behind her. The wolves stood watching, uncertain. Emma raised her good hand, palm out, fingers spread. Go home, she said softly. You're safe now. Go home. The wolves seemed to understand. They turned as one, a river of gray and silver, and flowed back toward the woods. But the gray wolf, the one Emma had saved, hesitated. It looked up at her one last time, and Thomas could have sworn he saw something like gratitude in its eyes. Then it too turned and loped toward the trees. The men watched until the last wolf disappeared into the forest. Then they turned to their horses, speaking quietly among themselves. Thomas heard fragments. Never seen anything like it. That girl has a gift. Maybe we've been going about this all wrong. He urged the horse forward, carrying Emma toward the house. Behind them, he heard Samuel call out, Caldwell, we'll be back tomorrow to talk details, and we'll bring supplies for the wolves. Thomas raised his hand in acknowledgement, too full of emotion to speak. Inside the house, Thomas worked quickly. He cleaned Emma's wound with whiskey, making her hiss in pain. The bullet had cut deep but clean. He bandaged it tightly with strips of clean cloth. You scared me half to death, he said, hands shaking as he tied the bandage. Jumping in front of that rifle like that. Emma looked at him with Martha's eyes. I had to, Papa. Just like you'd jump in front of a bullet for me. He couldn't argue with that. He pulled her into a careful hug, mindful of her arm. Your mother would be so proud of you, he whispered. I'm proud of you. Emma buried her face in his shoulder. I was so scared they'd kill them all, that nothing I said would matter. Thomas stroked her hair. You changed their minds. You showed them something they'd never seen before. That took more than courage. That took faith. They stayed like that for a long moment, father and daughter, healing together in ways that went deeper than wounded flesh. Over the following weeks, things changed in ways Thomas never imagined possible. Samuel's son, whose name was Matthew, came every Saturday to hunt with them. He was quiet at first, ashamed of what he'd almost done, but Emma forgave him, and gradually they became friends. Other ranchers contributed meat, scraps, even money for ammunition. The wolves stayed in the deep woods mostly, but occasionally Emma would see them and share a moment of connection. The cattle stayed safe. Not a single loss that spring. Emma's arm healed slowly, leaving a scar she wore like a badge of honor. Thomas watched her change too, growing more confident, more herself. She laughed again. She sang. She even started teaching Matthew about the wolves, sharing her knowledge. And Thomas learned something too. That love wasn't about control. It wasn't about providing and protecting from a distance. It was about seeing, really seeing the people you loved, understanding what mattered to them, being willing to change for them. One evening in late April, Thomas and Emma sat on the porch watching the sunset. The air smelled of spring grass and pine. In the distance, a wolf howled. Emma tilted her head listening. That's the gray one, she said with certainty. He's calling his mate. Thomas listened too, hearing only a wild sound, but he believed her. She'd proven herself right about so much. Another howl answered, then another. A chorus of voices, wild and beautiful. Do you ever regret it? Thomas asked. Getting involved with them in the first place? Emma thought for a moment. No. I regret that people got hurt, that you lost cattle, but I don't regret trying to save something that needed saving. She looked at him. Do you? Thomas smiled. I regret not seeing you sooner, not listening when you needed me. But the wolves? He shook his head. They taught me something important, that sometimes the things we fear most are just misunderstood, that maybe the world needs more people willing to look closer. Emma leaned against his shoulder, and Thomas wrapped his arm around her. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, one by one, filling the vast Montana sky. Somewhere in the woods, the wolves sang their evening song. And for the first time in 3 years, Thomas felt complete. Not because everything was perfect, but because he and his daughter were finally seeing each other, finally connected. The wolves had been a bridge between them, strange as that sounded, a bridge built of courage and compassion and love. "Papa," Emma said softly. "Yes? Thank you for believing in me." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for teaching me how." They stayed there until the moon rose, silver and bright, casting long shadows across the ranch. The same ranch where, just months ago, a man had stood frozen in fear, watching his daughter surrounded by wolves. Now Thomas understood what he'd seen that morning. Not a threat, not danger, but a girl who'd found her purpose, who'd chosen love over fear, who'd changed an entire community's heart. And in changing them, she'd saved more than wolves. She'd saved her father, too. Saved him from a life of work without meaning, from grief without healing, from the slow death of living without really seeing. Emma had shown him that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is care about something beyond yourself. Even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when the whole world tells you you're wrong. Because love, real love, isn't about being safe. It's about being willing to take a bullet for what matters. The wolf song faded into the night. Emma's breathing slowed, and Thomas realized she'd fallen asleep against his shoulder. He sat very still, not wanting to wake her. Above them, the stars wheeled slowly across the sky. In the barn, the horses shifted. In the distance, a coyote yipped. The ranch breathed with life, wild and domestic, all finding ways to coexist. Thomas thought about Martha, wished she could see them now. Maybe she could somehow. Maybe she was smiling, knowing her daughter had inherited her compassion, her courage, her unshakable belief that love could change the world. Thomas closed his eyes and made a promise to the night, to Martha, to himself. He would never stop seeing Emma, never stop listening, never let work or grief or fear build walls between them again, because he'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that people, like wolves, need to be seen for who they really are, not who we think they are, not who we fear they might be, but who they truly are in all their complicated, beautiful, terrifying humanity. And once you really see someone, once you really let them in, everything changes. The morning would bring new challenges, more cattle to tend, more wolves to feed, more neighbors to convince. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Thomas held his daughter close and felt the weight of the world lift, because they were together, because they understood each other, because love had proven stronger than fear. And somewhere in the woods, 200 wolves slept soundly, dreaming wolf dreams, safe for one more night, because a girl had believed they deserved to live. Sometimes second chances arrive when we least expect them. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear about it. Have you ever fought for something everyone else gave up on? Have you ever changed someone's mind through love instead of force? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, stories about courage and compassion and the bridges we build between different worlds, subscribe. I'll be here, waiting to share them with you. Because every story deserves to be told, and every heart deserves to be seen.